Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Dan Cumberland, I was so looking forward to our discussion today. Anyone that positions themselves as an entrepreneur and a vocational provocateur is got to be someone that we were going to have to talk with. So
it was destined.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome today to People in Transition.
I love it. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Dan, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I love this question, and different times in my life I would answer it different ways. But furthest back that I remember really thinking like this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to both be, and maybe stereotypical, an astronaut, but then I also was, as a probably junior higher, really into Jurassic Park and wanted to recreate dinosaurs. So I guess a genetic scientist. I wanted to study DNA and figure out a way to bring dinosaurs back to life. Is really what I wanted to be. A rock star at some point. Then a composer. I've had all kinds of dreams along the way.
What were the transition moments that occurred to get you from that picture of yourself as an astronaut, DNA specialist, and a rock star?
Yes.
Get you from there to where you're at today?
Yeah, great question. There's so many transitions along the way, and a lot of it really kind of gets at the heart of what I have on my LinkedIn and some elsewhere online, that I have a vocational provocateur, that these kind of conversations matter so much to me because all of the transitions along the way were so painful in my own life. So wanted to be a rock star, as I said, was really interested in music, wanted to write music, started going to school for that. Kind of parallel with that, was really involved in a youth ministry. This is my high school years, and felt like at that point in my life that God was calling me to go into ministry, or like ministry, what I should do with my life. And so went to school for both music composition and ministry. Right after college, jumped into a youth pastorate at a small church. And pretty quickly, I could look back and use these words, didn't have them at the time, was really depressed, a lot of anxiety, and was having just these really stressful breakdowns before events and things like that. Was really struggling with all the pressures and expectations coming at me from all of parents and other pastors on staff and all of these things that, looking back, I could, if it was someone else, would say that person needs some help. They might not be in the right fit for them. But because of all this expectation, all this pressure that I had felt in my life, that this was the thing that, maybe God had called me to, the capital G, capital C calling, didn't really know what else to do with my life. I felt just profoundly stuck. Started over time, got into therapy, which was super helpful with the depression piece, but still had this existential angst of, I don't know where I'm going. I don't really know what direction to head next. But I know that the one thing that I thought my life was headed towards, which was ministry doesn't seem to be a good fit for me. So then what else is, and where do I turn to start answering those questions? And was just at a loss for how to answer those. Started trying to piece it together, reading like every book I could find, talking to anyone who even just said words like calling or vocation or career guidance. I would like just eat it up, and I would want to have more conversation and dig in deeper. Got into a leadership retreat setting with a leadership coach and a few other folks, and we were doing this exercise. We're telling the last couple of years of our lives and then getting feedback from other people in the room, seeing what they see, what they hear in our stories, and just kind of taking turns. Everyone goes and presents their last year or so. I took my turn, presented, where I've been, the things that had happened, the good things, the bad things, all of it, and then opened up the floor to questions of kind of the process that we were in. And immediately, the first question that the coach in the room asked is, Dan, who told you that you needed to be a youth pastor? Immediately felt like my blood kind of start to boil inside of me, because I'm like, no one told me that I needed to do this. Well, if anyone did, it was God that told me that I needed to do this. And that moment, I feel like, is just a profound moment in my life, because as I've continued down this path, as I've continued to do my work around hearing my own voice and finding my way into career and through transitions, as we're talking about here, I've come to see it was actually my youth pastor at that time in my life, in my formative years, who told me that. He might not have said it directly. He might not have pulled me aside. I don't think he ever did and say, hey, Dan, this is what you need to do. But it was just part of his worldview that he existed in the world, was that ministry was the best thing that you could do with your life. And so I just absorbed that from being around him as one of the few adults in my life who was really investing in me as a teenager. Absorbed that into my mentality and just assumed that was one of my operating assumptions of life, that ministry was the best thing that I could do. And so I was trying to do it. I was giving it my gosh darn best effort, and it really wasn't working. Not too long after that, I came to accept that I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole, but I didn't know where to find a square hole, I guess you could say, to keep going with that analogy. And so was looking for options. I knew I needed to leave that job. I'd been there at this point almost 5 years. It was 5 years by the time that I actually left, but didn't know what that next step would be. Decided to go back to school, as often people do in these transitional moments when you're not sure. More schooling seems like a good answer. More schooling also is a very palatable answer, rather than I'm quitting my job because I just don't like it. It's an easier story to tell to all the families in the church and the parents of the students that I was working with and to the students themselves. So I think that was also a piece of it. But I went to school, it's a seminary. They have just had a few programs: psychology, interdisciplinary studies, and then MDiv program, Masters of Divinity program. I kind of took the choose your own adventure path and made up a degree around vocation and calling, formation, studying how people become who they are, and trying to answer the question partly for myself of how do we make these decisions? How do we navigate the space of meaning and purpose when it comes to work? And went through that program. Through that program, found that this really is my work, my passion in the world is to help people with these ideas. And then I had to answer the question of, okay, now, so if that's the thing that I want to do, where am I going to put that? What context am I going to put that in? And where am I going to go to, I guess you could say, flex those muscles? And decided also through that program, I guess, came to accept and own that I'm an entrepreneur. I like starting things. I like doing things my own way. I don't like being told what to do, which is probably also why it wasn't a good fit for me to be in ministry. So I started the Meaning Movement, an online business around work and meaning, a podcast, a blog, some courses, and I really just do everything I can to help people with these themes. Also have a handful of other entrepreneurial projects. Have a software company called Upside Builders that launches software. Most recent is Trust Scout, which is a video testimonial collection tool. I have a few irons in the fire, but those are the major transitions that have taken me from dreaming of dinosaur DNA to doing what I do now.
So Dan, this really lends itself, you set it up perfectly for my first question that I thought of. Why should you know and be clear on the purpose of the job you're trying to get? Why should that be a starting point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's so many good reasons for it. One is it's best to have intention in being certain that the direction that you're going is a good direction to go, particularly if there's a lot of cost associated with that transition, especially if it's a major career change that requires relocation or extra schooling or all of those things. So having clarity around that, testing that hypothesis, this is something that I think is really important. Maybe we should just work with this dinosaur DNA scientist analogy, right? Treat it like a scientist studying yourself. And if you think about, okay, I want to go in this direction, what is an experiment that I could create with a hypothesis that I would succeed and feel like I'm engaged and feel like that kind of work is purposeful for me? What is a mini experiment that could put me into that context and see if that hypothesis proves to be true, so that then before you actually start doing the work, before you start going through all the costs, handling all the costs along the way that it'll take to get there, you've already at least validated the idea in some small way. So I'm a big fan of micro experiments and you moving from micro to larger experiments. So I think that's a starting point to answering that question. Secondly, just doing work that is purposeful, doing work that fills you, doing work that has purpose gives you something back. So you're not just working for the sake of the career, for the sake of the paycheck, but it's giving you some sort of energy. It's like this reciprocation that you're putting your energy, you're putting your life into the job, and almost magically, right? The job is also helping you feel engaged, helping you feel excited about the work that you're doing.
Let's talk about how you find a career with purpose, and especially if I'm not comfortable with that self-reflection that you're talking about. I get scared in my head.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, if self-reflection is not your thing, that's okay. And I think that sometimes in this space, a lot of times we can focus so much on self-reflection that we don't actually take action. It's like we want to self-reflect our way out of feeling stuck and into a purposeful and engaged career, which is, again, why I'm such a big fan of experiments, right? So instead of just self-reflecting, trying to untangle the knot, I guess, of your story and what brought you here, there's a handful of things you can do. But there's 4 areas. This is from my research, both through grad school, through having conversations on my podcast with folks who are doing work that matters to them, through one-on-one coaching that I've done, that there are 4 areas where people find purpose in their work. So 4 areas. I'm going to go through all 4 of these. Since I was a pastor, they all start with P because they have to alliterate, right? The 4 Ps of purpose in work. As I go through these, I'd like to invite listeners to think about it in your own life, both where you are right now, where you have been in the past, other jobs that you had, as well as if you're in a transition or thinking about a transition, how this might look, what kind of transition would allow you to find more meaning or lean into more of these ideas. And you could even, if you want to get really technical about it, without getting too self-reflective, just a tiny bit, I hope that's okay, Bob, if we just do a tiny bit of analysis, you could rate yourself, you could create a scale of 0 to 10 for each of these 4 categories for the job that you're in, and again, also doing it for the jobs that you've been in the past, which could then help you create a matrix of sorts to look at the opportunities that are on the table and the directions that you're considering going. So with all of that front matter out of the way, let's go through these 4 P's. So the first is the people. That could be your coworkers, that could be your clients, customers, bosses, managers, all the people that you interact with. I find that a lot of times people who love their job and feel like it's a purposeful work find joy, find satisfaction, find connection with the people that they are working with and for in that work. So the people, the product. Now I want to use product for anyone who I guess does product, right? In a tech startups and that kind of thing. It might be more used to that word, but outside of that context, it might feel a little bit funny if you're, maybe a doctor or something like that. The product, if you're in the medical field, the product of your work is healthy people. So it's the goal that the organization or the work that you're doing, the goal that it has in mind. That's usually the first place that we look when we're thinking about purpose. We think about working in an organization that's doing something that has a good cause associated with it. It's really easy to point at this and say, this is really purposeful. This is really good work for, nonprofits, right? The helping professions. They're all making the world a better place. So that is one place where you can find purpose. You're doing work that is producing a change in the world, producing something in the world that you feel really connected to and that you feel is really important work. So we have the people, we have the product. Then we have next the process. Process is the day in, day out of what you do. So maybe you're a people person and you like talking to people all day and you are in some customer facing role and you just get to have fun laughing, making your customers laugh at your jokes or whatever it might be. Or maybe you're really analytical and you get to work with numbers all day and that's just really fun for you. Or maybe a place where we often think about process as being really fulfilling with something really creative, like an artist, right? A painter. They just love love to paint, be in front of their canvas and painting, the process of actually doing the work. So that's a really important piece where you can find meaning and satisfaction. So we have the people, we have the product, we have the process, and then the final is the profit. And this is just what it gives back to you. This can be in terms of dollars and cents, the literal profit, but it also can be more than that. The benefits, it's the lifestyle, it's providing for your family, it's whatever is coming back from that work. So again, looking at where you are in the job that you are in, the work that you're currently doing, how would you rate yourself on all four of those categories? I think that's a really great place to start and to see, okay, maybe some of these are really lacking in my life. Maybe certain ones are really strong. Maybe certain ones are really, really bad. And going from there, it can give you some really good direction to pursue as far as making a change. Maybe there's, if everything is really good, but the profit's low, maybe instead of pursuing a whole new career change, maybe you just need to pursue another role in the same organization, a similar role that pays you better, getting a raise, whatever it might be. But what I find is if we can look through those four lenses at your work situation, it can give you some real tangible next steps to pursue.
And I love the rating them. And you're right, some might be very high and some might be low. So you want to look at the individual scores as well as the score in totals.
Just to follow up, I don't want to spend the whole time on this, but it's really easy, again, because that product piece is the place where he often goes, looking at an organization that's doing good work in the world. Often, especially in nonprofits and helping professions, you get into situations where people are working for an organization that's doing really good work in the world, but the context is not working, right? That it's an unhealthy work environment. So the people score would be really low. They don't pay very well because they're under-resourced. So the profit score is really low. And so that's just kind of one way that can work out as an example.
Dan, I read someplace that being good at your job and being good at landing a job are two different skill sets. What does that mean for you? And how should we help our clients understand those differences?
Absolutely true. They're two fundamentally different things. So getting a job, landing a job, it's really sales. You're selling yourself. You're trying to convince someone else that you are going to be the solution to their problem. Their problem is they need someone to do some sort of job, and you have to sell them the solution that is yourself, that you fit the gap that they have. And that can be night and day different than what it looks like to actually be in a job. And so what do we do with that as far as helping folks? First, I think just naming it is really important. I think the fact that you even just bring this up, Bob, just shows that people listening, you've got a good guide in this process here because Bob's asking the right questions. But then as far as practical steps is to really accept that and work on the skills that it takes to land that job. Those skills will be partly presentation. How do you present yourself? The soft skills of conversation, of how you carry yourself, how you dress, all of those kinds of things when it comes to interviews. But it's also sometimes hard skills on deliverables, depending on what roles you're going into. The hard skills of problem solving, of there's work product that you need to produce in order to show that you're capable, like practicing solving those problems so that you'll be ready in the interviews when they're asked, when there's an assignment given, that you're able to perform for them.
Dan, if you're looking for a particular type of culture in the organization that you're going to join, maybe it's a more laid back, more family focused, or maybe it's a very entrepreneurial environment, or maybe it's a hard charging, take no prisoners type of culture.
Yeah.
How do you find out what that company culture is?
Yep.
And a follow-up question to that is, what if the culture doesn't fit what you're looking for, but everything else, money, location, what you're doing, everything else does fit, but the culture isn't right for you? What should you do?
Yeah, great question. So first, as far as finding it, the simple answer is asking a lot of questions. But at the end of the day, a culture isn't something that is stated. Culture isn't made up by who people say they are, but how they live and how they go about their day in and day out. So it's not necessarily the best to just say, tell me about your culture, but to ask lots of questions about the day in and day out of what people love about working there, what conflict looks like. So basically, think about all the different aspects of culture. You mentioned like a family environment. If you ask about how conflict is handled, that could tell you something about it. That conflict conflict is handled softly, gently, or, get into stories, get people to tell you about what it looks like to work there. And then also like negotiation, like all those harder things, right? If you're looking for something that's really cutthroat, and ask people, what does negotiation look like? What is the most tense moment you've had at work? And what was that like? And so maybe these aren't in your first interviews, right? Maybe your second interviews, third interviews, just to kind of verify some of this stuff. But I think those are good questions to ask. So don't just ask, what is the culture like? And especially don't ask, is the culture A, B, or C? Because then you're kind of planting ideas. You want to ask those kinds of open-ended questions. And then the follow-up question, Bob, that you asked is, what do you do if it's not necessarily in alignment with what you're looking for? I think, again, this is kind of, for me, goes back to the people piece of those 4 Ps. If the culture is in opposition to the kind of culture that you thrive in, then I'd say that's a major red flag. If it's somewhere in the middle, then I think it's a matter of looking at the other parts of that, the purpose, the profit, product, and thinking about, okay, can I take a hit on the culture piece, the people piece, in order to have higher marks on these others? And is that going to be okay? The dream job, of course, again, going back to those 4 Ps, a dream job is that you're 1 out of 10, you're 10 all the way down on all 4 of those. But really, in actuality, rarely do you find that perfect fit in all of those categories. So it's always just a matter of trade-offs. So the question would be, is the trade-off worth it in the end? I think that's a decision that you have to make personally.
Dan, I want to switch gears here just a little bit and talk a bit about networking. What should be the objective of someone who is going through a networking process because they're in a job transition?
Yeah. The objective at the end of the day, if you're in the process already, the objective is to find an opening into an opportunity. So finding someone who knows someone who is looking for the kind of role that you are looking for. That's the best case scenario. Majority of jobs, and for anyone who's been searching for some time, has probably seen this to be true. The majority of jobs are hired today through the network, especially as you get higher up into companies. Rarely are higher level positions hired, just off of a resume. But that, I guess it really depends person to person, but more organization to organization. But when you're networking, you're looking to spread a wide net. Look for folks who might know someone who might know someone who might know someone who's looking for you. And I think that's, at the end of the day, the goal. But I think it's really important to note that networking should be an ongoing process, and it's best started long before you need it. So cultivating relationships is really the way I think of networking, which hopefully has less of that used car salesman kind of sleazy salesman vibe, and more of just being friendly, getting to know people, helping people as much as you can, so that then when it's your turn and you're looking for something, people are excited to help you in what you're trying to accomplish.
A follow-up to that is, when you're done with one of these networking meetings, do you ask for other names that you should network with? Or how do you expand your network? What's your coaching on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say as much as possible, yes, within reason. And so it depends on the context. If it's a group setting and you're talking to a lot of different people, I would only ask the people that you've had some significant connection with and where you feel like there's some good chemistry there, and ask them, just kind of state what you're looking for. Say, I'm trying to transition into X, Y, or Z field. Do you know anyone in that field or at an organization that might be looking for someone like me? And if they say yes, then you just ask them for a connection there. And then I'm really a big fan of following up with those folks, just picking their brain. And I want to come back to that word, picking your brain, because that can be a really red flag phrase. But getting together with them, asking some targeted questions, that's a better way of saying it, and then asking them, who else do they know that you can talk to? And ask them specifically, could you connect me with 3 other people that I should talk to help me in my process? And to go back to that idea of picking your brain, a lot of people are really open to helping other people find their jobs, especially when those connections come through their network. But it's best done in a very abbreviated context with a very targeted and objective outcome as much as possible. So rather than saying, hey, can I buy you coffee, or can I pick your brain, have a good reason to connect with them. Maybe it's to find out more about their workplace. Maybe it's to explore something about their specific type of role that they're in, the way that works, management in that field, field or whatever it might be, but to have some really specific questions. And then those conversations don't need to take more than 15, 20 minutes. I really try to honor people's time, keep those conversations moving so that you're then leaving the conversation. The person feels like you've had asked some great questions, had some engaging conversation, and then it's much easier for them to connect you with further into their network because they know that you're not going to be asking the next person for hours and hours of their time or something along those lines.
Dan, how do you think a recruiter or a hiring manager reacts when they hear that you've been laid off? And kind of a follow-up to that is, how can you better manage that message that I was laid off from my job?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think a hiring manager, what they're always just looking for is the story of what happened. And it depends on the specifics of the situation and the reasons for it. Hopefully it wasn't some major infraction that you did. Regardless, to have a good story, a true and honest story is important, but a story that explains the situation. And if you are culpable, if you were responsible, then to own that responsibility and your learnings from it so that you can then apply that to your next situation. At the end of the day, a hiring manager is looking for someone to do a job, and they just want to know if there's any liabilities coming down the line. So if there are liabilities, if there was something that you did, if you were a part of an infraction or something that caused you to get laid off, then you need to have some really good reasons on why that's not going to happen again and how you've learned from it. And if it was a product of other transitions happening in the company or whatever it might be, just to be able to tell that story and say, this is what was going on in the company. I unfortunately was X, Y, and Z reason that my department or my role was cut, and make sure you just have a good story for it. And I think you just have to own it and don't feel ashamed of it. I think that's really important in general when it comes to work. I think that shame can really creep up, and there are things that can happen, jobs that we have that we're not proud of, or things that happen at work, and then we have these feelings that we don't want to address or don't want to name, and they're negative, and they end up driving us because we're running from them and trying not to give them voice. I think it's really important that you don't let them have power over you and just tackle them head on. And so that means if you have a lot of feelings about it, especially negative feelings, to address those as much as you can. See a therapist about it, talk to close friends about it, get used to talking about it, like practice your story. Practice talking about anything negative that happened so that then when you're with a recruiter, with someone who's interviewing you, and you're starting into this somewhat delicate emotional space, it's not the first time that you've had to put words to it. I think that's really important.
Dan, any books or other resources that you'd recommend to someone going through their own job transition?
Absolutely. I have just a little self-promotion, I guess. I have a lot of resources I've created for folks. I have a book that's free on Amazon called The Calling Process that walks you through a process of how do you find work that's meaningful and purposeful for you. I have a podcast. You're listening to a podcast here, and just wherever you're listening to this, you search for my name or The Meaning Movement, you'll find that. And then I also have a mini course called 5 Clues to Your Calling. It's really quick, very easy to digest, 5 little short lessons with a few reflections that can help you just start to get more clarity on what you want and where you want to go next. And so those are 3 resources there that I would recommend for anyone who's in that transition.
Dan, if our listeners remember 3 things as they go through their own job transition, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away from today?
That's great. So before we hit the record button, I was like, what are those 3 things going to be? Because I want to make sure that they fit with where we've been. The 3 things that I'd invite people to take away is first, just those 4 Ps that I listed out earlier, the people, the product, the profit, and the process. So using those as a matrix or a lens through which to view your transition and where you're going, that's the first tool I'd like to offer. Secondly is just the importance of the emotional work that can come up with telling your story around work, of narrating sometimes delicate spaces. And so I think just inviting people to do that emotional work before they're in the moment with a recruiter. And then thirdly, we didn't really talk about this too much, but I just really feel it's important to say to people that are in this space, when you're in transitions, it can feel really lonely. It can feel like everyone else has a job and you don't, or everyone else knows where they're going and you don't. But what I just want to say to everyone listening, that like this is like a very human process that you're in. It's very common. Everyone goes through transitions at some point. Even if you're not seeing it, you have a lot of company and you have what you need. You're going to make it through and come out the other side and live to tell about it. So those are the three things that I think are important for folks to remember.
Dan, I know that I can speak for my listeners that you certainly are a provocateur. You speak from the heart, you speak from experience, and you speak because you want people to be successful in their job transition. So, Dan, thank you so much for your time today on People in Transition.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been so fun to have me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month, or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.